missed you, Rabbi. We were all here yesterday.
Very good Shiur yesterday.
Thank you.
Very concise. It's filled in for you.
We used to say that, thank you very much, that the 20 minutes that he didn't speak were the best.
But then they don't get to sleep well enough.
That's right.
Maybe you could share us what he missed yesterday. Share with us.
That's the guy. But the guy who walked out in the middle of the rabbi's speech. I walked out in the middle of the rabbi's speech and the rabbi said to him later on, why'd you walk out in the middle of my speech? We're in Parshas Bo, no wonder. Okay.
We're throwing out questions.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Probably said you're doing questions, but only by the last and Parsha, Malchus Beforos, does a Kodesh Baruch Hu make a differentiation between Klal Yisrael and a Mitzri, right? Therefore, you put a sign and under this. So that but the other ones, he doesn't make them do a thing. Only by Malchus Baruch, like in other words, and it's a Kodesh Baruch Hu Batzmo doing it, so he certainly doesn't need any differentiation. Why by Malchus Beforos the Kodesh Baruch Hu actually make?
But Hashem passed over the Jewish homes, so it sounds like the
it out. And the ones that Shmuseim, those are the ones that did make it out. The forfeits
Right,
were Mishlam.
apparently.
Does putting the blood on the doorpost qualify as Yesirus Tata?
Has to be. That has to be the case. The only question again is why specifically. Let's first talk a little bit about carbon passing. So the Sforms say that that one of the reasons that the Egyptians deified the sheep specifically were because they were of the opinion that the influence of astrology was such that people's behavior was in fact predetermined. So in our own time, while I think there certainly are many people who are inclined to check their astrology, but I think that almost everybody takes it with a grain of salt. So they'll look into what the newspaper has about what the meaning is of their astrology and smile about it. But the Egyptians didn't smile about it. The Egyptians believed in the fact that the astrological signs were in a certain sense were a final verdict. In the first half of last century, both Freud and B.F. Skinner had different versions of psychic determinism. So Freud believed that the child was the father of the adult, and that a person's, in a certain sense, a person's life was determined by those early experiences. And B.F. Skinner's position was that if you just knew enough about a person, you could predict what he was going to do. So that free will was not in Skinner's playbook. So the Egyptians had their own version of psychic determinism, which is that if you're born under a certain sign, then that means ABC. And to some extent, therefore, the accountability, the moral accountability of a person was severely constricted because you couldn't hold a person responsible for the fact that he was born with a very volatile temper, or that he was born with a very excitable nature, or that he was born with a very powerful appetite for whether it was food or sex or whatever it was, because that's how a person was born, and a person is kind of helpless. So they worshipped the sheep as the kind of the physical counterpart to the ram of astrology, because the ram was what do you call that in astrology?
Aries.
Huh?
No Aries. Right?
Aries.
Aries.
Aries. So
What's
Aries was the sign of spring, and it was the Rosh of the of astrology. So that was a very powerful influence on Egyptian theology, and by extension, it was also a very powerful influence on Jews who lived in that culture. In order for Klal Yisrael to be free, Cherus has to take the position that a person does have free will, even though the Gemara does indicate that the astrology does have some impact, but it's not fixed, it's not determined. A person is born with certain inclinations, certain predilections, and a person is capable of channeling those, sublimating those. You can use any one of our, in a certain sense, any one of our shortcomings, which are a form of negative energy. We can learn how to manage them and to redirect them in a way in which they will be part of Kedusha. B'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol mi'edecha, is even with your Yetzer Hara, you can work with it, and you're supposed to work with it, and that's kind of what Jewish freedom is all about. Jewish freedom says you are not a slave to your passions, you're not a slave to your appetites, you're not a slave to your kind of genetic inclinations or predispositions. We have a responsibility to work with them and to sublimate them. So, in order to set Klal Yisrael free, in order for them to go free, they needed to make a statement about this Egyptian theology. They needed to make a statement, and they needed to refute the principle that says that we're locked into our astrological birth sign, that we do have the ability to rise above it. All of the Makkos until that point were supposed to be instructive. So they were supposed to be that each one somehow taught Klal Yisrael some kind of a lesson about the Hashgacha Pratius, about the fact that the Rabbi Michel is involved in nature, that he can communicate with human beings, and that ultimately that he has an expectation of us to live in a way which corresponds to his ratzon. So after those 9 lessons, now comes the graduation. I've I took you through nine classes. I've exposed you to 9 different messages in this curriculum, and now comes this is the time when now you have to have you been listening, and are you prepared to be free? So one of the things about the Korban Pesach is that it demanded that you have to be amongst the minuyim on the Korban Pesach. If there were those people who were reluctant to make the statement because they couldn't stand up against, whether it was the Egyptian culture or the Egyptians, or they were whatever it was, they were too timid to be counted. Once the Korban Pesach had been shechted, you couldn't be a Johnny come lately. You couldn't be money anymore. So this was a time in which the Korban Pesach was the time that you had to stand up and be counted. You had to let,
How does that job with everyone who was post Choshech, Lichora, was everyone who was now Manui al Yedei HaKadosh Baruch Hu to go out? They hadn't really set up all their chaburas.
Right. They hadn't set up their chaburas, and it was still, this was the time that separated between the men and the mice, or however that goes. So, you have to shech the Korban Pesach and take the blood of the Korban Pesach and put it on the doorposts and on the lintel. And in a certain sense, that becomes the kind of again, part of a lesson plan about how Klal Yisrael is going to conduct itself throughout history in order to sustain its integrity. So there are 2 parts about this. The lentil is the purpose of the lentil, of the mashkov, is to stop the door from swinging. So it's there for when you close the door. The doorposts represent the things that form the opening. So the question of really kind of our success in managing our identity throughout history is, do we know when to close the door to the outside, and do we know when to open the door? There are times that clearly we need to exercise discretion about not allowing the street into our house, its attitudes and its values and its priorities and its pritzus and its habits. So we need to know how to close the door, but we also need to know how to open the door, because number one, it's not only that the world does have some good things to offer, but it's also important that we recognize that we're not supposed to live insular lives, that we're supposed to influence the world. And as much as the door needs to open for us to be able to let certain parts of the world in, even more importantly, it's important for us to know that we have an obligation to sanctify the world, that we are a mentor nation, Mamlechas Kehanim, that we're supposed to be a priestly people. We're supposed to be a nation that is an Lagoyim. We're supposed to be a light to the nations. So this statement of we are capable of slaughtering this sacred animal, meaning we are capable of making of rejecting the idea that that our lives are predetermined by how we are born, and that consequently we are victims of an accident of birth, and we're not to be held accountable for our immoral behavior or our violent behavior or whatever else comes along, or our inabilities to behave properly. So that's kind of like the graduation. Right? We had these 9 lessons, and now the time has come when we have to vote. Where do we belong? And we have to vote where do we belong in a way in which our cherus, in a certain sense, is defined. So we define our cherus as we are people who stand above predeterminism, and we're a people who recognize that we have a responsibility to the world, but we also recognize that in order to preserve our integrity, that there are times we have to close the door. So that's the door over the doorposts and on the doorposts.
So in that Makkah, if those Yidden that didn't do that would have again.
The impression that we have is that the Bechor in that context would not survive. It's not clear that. I seem to remember having seen one of the Meforshim that the Ben Shalom, nonetheless, even if they chose not to do it, that the Bechorim survived. Lev Hutner, their namesake, says that the Kedusha of the Bechor, the Torah tells us, came from the fact that Hashem took the lives of all of the Egyptian Bechorim, and he spared the lives of Bnei Yisrael's Bechorim. So he makes a kind of a fascinating point. He says that whose army was it that they perished because the Ben Shalom had the Malachim sing Shira, and the soldier that was huh? Right. No, that was they fled. That was when they fled. But this was when they were all dead, and they were all dead.
The mountains crushed them. The mountains came together.
No, this was.
What happened? Who sent you?
The clouds were woke up in the morning, and the entire camp of the whoever it was, I don't know if it was Nebuchadnezzar or it was Melchashur. Huh?
The Assyrians?
Huh?
I think it was the Assyrians who.
Went to sleep and then
Anyway, the Gemara says that what happened was that the Rebbeinu Shalom instructed the angels to sing, and the soldiers, whatever it was, how many hundreds of thousands of soldiers, they heard the angels singing, and they weren't capable of handling that level of energy. It was and they died. So Hutner said that what happened over here is that the Rebbeinu Shalom, Ani v'lei Malach, Ani v'lei Sorov, Ani v'lei Ach, the Rebbeinu Shalom came into Mitzrayim himself, and his the way in which the Bechorim died was by virtue of the overwhelming presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the Bechorim. They couldn't handle it, and they shattered them. So, in order to prevent the Jewish Bechorim from being shattered, he had to be Mikadesh them in a way in which they could tolerate it. It was that Kedusha that he gave the Bechorim to tolerate his presence that set them apart, that made them, and it wasn't until the Chet Ego that they lost their status.
What's the shock of in Bnei Yisrael, the Bnei Yisrael having to be spared? Spared from what?
The what?
You said that the Chorim, the Jewish people, were spared. Spared from what? This was a punishment for the Mitzrayim of the Chorim. Why we schlepped into this having to be spared? Like, I appreciate I'm a Bechor, so I appreciate that I was spared, but what was I spared from? Like, why would I have been schlepped into this? We were already punished as a slave nation.
In other words, was there a Chiyuv Nisa on the Bechorim of the Yidden?
So, what do I have to do with that?
Well, the problem is that, you had this Kitrug by the Yam Suf, where the South Shal Mitzrayim complained to the Rebbeinu Shalom that he was being discriminatory because Halalu Evdei Zara, Halalu Evdei Zara. That Klal Yisrael were as guilty of the Egyptian as the Egyptians were of Evdei Zara. So I guess part of this would be that somehow the Jewish Bechorim were not completely innocent, and the Midas Hadin could have insisted that there was no defense in discriminating between them.
Darkness.
Well, the Makis Bechoros was to shatter the spirit of the Egyptians. Until this point, they were still resistant and oppositional, and they wanted to hold on to the Jews. So it required something that was a massive stroke. So the killing of the firstborn was what broke their spirit. Okay, now we have no choice. We got to let them go. So the question, though, was if the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to grant it, and this is what's going to allow the Egyptians to remove their objection to Klal Yisrael's emancipation. But is it fair?
On the surface.
I know what I'm saying to you. It's not a punishment. If it's a punishment, you say the Egyptians deserve the punishment, and the Jews don't deserve the punishment. This wasn't an issue of punishment. This was something to.
But on the surface, it seems like all the Makos, except for maybe the plague of darkness, was very Mitzri-centric. We were outsiders. It seemed on the surface we would have nothing. This has nothing to do with us. This is a gzera on the Mitzri. But is it not? Or is it not so Mitzri-centric? Is it really like?
No, I think it is Mitzri-centric, but it was supposed to be. Again, these are all supposed to be lessons. These are all supposed to be instructive. Klal Yisrael were spectators. They were like sitting in class, watching these lessons. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu this was their curriculum for freedom.
This is the first cheder.
The first cheder, that's right.
Yeah, there's a Gemara that seems to be related.
Right.
And Avram Avinu was in Kibshan Eish, and Gabriel wants to go down, and Asus Tzaddik, and the Kodesh Baruch says, "Ani yochid be'olami, hu yochid be'olamo, na'alu yochid lahatzil es hayochid." So, we know Klal Yisrael is called Goy Chad Ba'aretz. So, what's the message there? I was, so the an inability for a malach to this is not it's past. Not that it's impossible necessarily, but this is. I was thinking maybe the havchana that the answer to the malach of Sarv Mitzrayim is halalu v'halalu is that only Kodesh Baruch Hu could be mavchen. There's a deeper level, and that's hanhogas hayichud. And on a deeper level, that the malach can't be masig.
The Pindali.
The question is, could it be instead that a malach has only one, is an omek, and therefore he's somewhat. Is that why he can't be masig? What's the chesron of a malach? That he can't be masig Avram Avinu.
That you're asking in the context of being Matzil B'nai Israel, that can be a Kodesh
Also
Baruch
with Avram Avinu, why can't a malach be masig? What does yichud have to do with the limitation of a malach?
But what's
Go yachad b'aretz, hu yachid. Ani yachid ba'olami, hu yachid ba'olami. This is something, there's a theme of yichud, which could explain what, it could explain why l'chor it's invoked in the case of Avram Avinu, that yichud is the nekuda which requires that HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself do the hatzolah. The question is, how do we understand the limitation of a malach to not be able to be masig yichud? HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps to do it.
Now that I once saw this at something we say, Refo'enu Hashem v'nei rofei. Right? Hashem, you heal us and we will be healed. We don't say that by any other bracha. We ask for something, and we don't also include the result. If you do this, then I will do it. So that's the only time that we say, Refo'enu Hashem v'nei rofei. If you heal us, we'll be healed. So one of the Sforim says that the whole energy, the whole life of a malach is his mission. So the malach, when he goes to do something, will somehow be limited by the virtue of the fact that he wants to be sent again, because any time that he does a shlichus, he's alive. The malach is dependent on the shlichus to feel alive. So he won't do it completely. He'll leave something undone. And if he leaves something undone, then he gets another chance to go back. So we say, Hashem, if you do it, that's why we say, Refuah Shlema. We wish somebody Refuah Shlema, because it should be complete. We say, Hashem, Refuah Hashem, and then V'nei Rofei, because if you send some malach to do it,
So the only level of Bechira and a malach is not to do the full shlichus.
He doesn't do the full thing. And I can tell you that there's no question in my mind that mentality is what makes all the car mechanics work. Because whenever I take my car in to fix, 2 weeks later something else breaks. So I think they fix something and then they loosen up another screw someplace, so I'll have to come back to them.
It's also the guys who build buildings.
There was a car mechanic in Lakewood, a guy, he used to call himself the God. But he said the raid was that you can only have him fix one thing. I'll give him two things.
Ein malach, they stay shlichus. You can't give him 2 shlichus.
Kisi Kol B'chor B'Eretz Yisrael, no? The pasuk says Kisi Kol B'chor B'Eretz Yisrael, which means Kol B'chor. Kol is Muslim everybody, no? Also Am Yisrael Muslim.
So what are you saying?
I'm saying, we're asking about, why the Shem says that Kisi Kol B'chor. That means Am Yisrael is also supposed to be part of this Muslim in the pasuk.
Under the call. Yeah, but
This putting the blood on the doorpost is post mitzvah, is the post mitzvah zrika sadam. They didn't do zrika of the dam they paid to their doorpost. We know post mitzvah, and if they didn't do zrika sadam, it wasn't, they hadn't fulfilled the mitzvah. That was
on the Korban Pesach.
on the Korban Pesach. So that was the korban for the Bachor.
Yeah,
so to
that was the
speak.
forerunner.
Those two mitzvahs. So many people are asking about why does it apply to the Bechor of Klal Yisrael also. I was actually thinking the opposite. What's so special that Hashem picked the Bechor of the Mitzvah to be, that's going to be like the big finale? Well, I could have picked anything.
No, they used to get special covered, no? The mitzvah used to get the
Something
Bachor.
special for the goyim of their Bechor, understood by Klal Yisrael, Kaddish, the Bechor, etc. By the Mitzvah, who cares? Like, why was that the final? That's not going to break it.
Sometimes the question is the answer. You're asking well, but it could be that means that from that we see that apparently it was significant to them, or otherwise he probably wouldn't have. So
why do we
probably
see-
in Egyptian culture, probably there was something.
Maybe because ein bias ein sham meis, ein bias ein sham meis. And Rashi explains, and how did it happen? Sometimes they had girls and so on and so forth. So it says that the Mitzrayim would come and do what they did with their friends' wives and their neighbors' wives and so on and so forth. So there are lots of chorus that lot more than you would think there should be. And the phenomenon was very widespread, and that got the message across a lot stronger. Maybe.
There's also, I think on a very practical level, there is a special relationship that people have with the firstborn. The firstborn is the one who makes people parents. My brother, my oldest brother, was a Bechor, used to say that the reason that the firstborn gets a double portion is because he's the experimental model. The reason that a Bechor gets 2 portions in the Nachla is because he's the experimental model. People, the parents learned how to parent on his back. It's like.
The Mamla says, I think he brings a whole bunch of reasons why the Bechor of Mitzrayim was kosher. If I remember correctly, they were the only ones who inherited. None of the other children inherited.
Saying that the younger children have to be become the older ones because they're older, and the older children have to become the younger ones because, and then the parents knew better how to be parents.
So we know there's a Bechina Bechor by Yidden. In Kedusha, what is the meaning of a Bechor by a Mitzvah?
Some question on the table.
That's what I was asking.
I'm not familiar with that. Again, I don't remember anything that would suggest that Mitzrayim did something to sanctify their firstborn. Like, I mean, for a period of time, our Bechorim were the Kohanim. They were the ones who were supposed to be the Kohanim. Maybe there was something similar that was going on with the Egyptians, that the firstborn was the family representative.
Well, we see it work.
It worked.
We got out.
I am as good.
But in Becheri Yisrael, I mean, there's something about being the Bechor, which has a special distinction attached to it. All right.
Let's go.
Say a few words about your Zodiacs as you were explaining yesterday.
The what?
A few words about your Zodiacs as you were explaining yesterday.
Yeah.
If you should. Is everyone here now?
Yesterday was my father's Yurtzak, Rabbi Michel.